call it a mountain, but it doesn't roar. It waits. The Mount of Olives rises quietly to the east of Jerusalem, crowned with graves and centuries of silence. But according to prophecy, that silence will not last forever. Because one day, the ground beneath this ancient ridge is supposed to split, not from war or erosion, but from the return of someone the earth still remembers. Zechariah said it clearly. On that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and the mountain will be split in two, not symbolic, not poetic. A rupture real, physical, impossible to ignore. And yet, the mountain hasn't moved. Not yet. The stones remain stacked like time itself, unmoved, unbroken. But prophets didn't speak in metaphors. They described thresholds, geographical moments, terrain as testimony. And this hill, where so many have buried their dead, may also be the place where something buried long ago rises again. Some believe it's already begun. Quiet tremors, subtle shifts, signs that don't make the news but whisper to those who still watch the land. They don't shout it, they pray it. Because if that mountain breaks, it won't just mean change. It will mean return. This isn't myth. It's a warning wrapped in reverence. The mountain isn't asleep. It's listening. And one day, when the right feet touch its crown, it will respond not with thunder, but with a fracture that splits history in two. Until then, the ground waits. But it does not forget. The prophet didn't speak in riddles. Zechariah's vision was sharp, etched like stone. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives. And the mount shall cleave in the midst, not someday, not maybe. In that day. And in that moment, the mountain doesn't tremble, it breaks. From east to west, a valley opens where solid rock once stood. To most, it reads like imagery, a spiritual metaphor wrapped in Hebrew poetry. But the language is too specific, the direction too deliberate. This wasn't a dream for the imagination. It was a fault line waiting for a footstep. When Zechariah recorded the prophecy, the Mount of Olives was already sacred. It watched over the Temple Mount like a witness. It bore the weight of kings, prophets, and tears. It was where Jesus wept. For Jerusalem, where the glory of God once departed. And according to that same vision, it's where he will return. Not in the clouds alone, but onto earth, onto that ridge, onto that exact place. And then it splits. Why a mountain? Why this? One, because it faces the east, the same direction from which the Lord entered the temple, the same alignment as the sealed gate below. East has always meant arrival, dawn, beginning. But Zechariah doesn't describe a gentle rising. He tells of a divine impact that breaks the crust of the world. A place where the spiritual collides with the geological. The return of the Messiah won't just be seen. It will be felt in the bones of the earth. This isn't about legend. It's about location. Zechariah named it the Mount of Olives. And if prophecy is true, then this mountain is not simply a backdrop to holy history. It is a trigger, a hinge. And one day, the pressure will release not from tectonics alone, but from the weight of a presence the earth was warned to expect. Prophecy may speak in visions, but the earth speaks in fractures. Beneath the Mount of Olives lies a fault line, mapped by modern geologists, running quietly through the rock and soil. It stretches from the Jordan Rift Valley, cuts through the eastern side of Jerusalem, and passes directly under the very mountain Zechariah named. For centuries it lay unnoticed, irrelevant to kings and pilgrims. But today, scientists call it unstable, active, a risk. They speak of tremors, of a quake long overdue. They do not speak of prophecy. But how could they? The language of faith and science often runs parallel, each suspicious of the other. And yet here they meet. A mountain said to split at a divine return, and a fault line capable of tearing it open. Coincidence or confirmation? No one engineered this. No builder laid the stone this way. The land was carved long before maps, before history. And long before Zechariah saw what he saw, the fault was already there, waiting beneath the surface. And now, in a time where satellites can read the shifts of soil and engineers measure stress in ancient rock, we find that the prophecy was never floating in the clouds. It was buried in the crust. The Mount of Olives is not metaphor. It is mechanism. And that fault line, it's not quiet out of peace. It's quiet out of purpose. The world doesn't often pay attention to what doesn't move. Still ground is overlooked, dismissed as stable, safe, permanent. But prophecy teaches that what seems still can break the hardest. And this fault hidden in plain sight has always been more than geology. It is a line drawn between now and what comes next, and the moment it moves, everything changes. If you stand on the Mount of Olives today, you'll see more graves than grass. Over 150,000 tombs stretch across its slope, a city of the dead facing the ancient walls of Jerusalem. Some of them are centuries old. Others are new, but they all stare in one direction, eastward, toward the Temple Mount, toward the promise. According to tradition, when the Messiah comes, the resurrection will begin here. Dust will give way to breath, and the first to rise will rise from this hill. But until then, the mountain is silent, the graves are closed, and the stones do not speak, or so it seems. In recent decades, this quiet has been interrupted, not by trumpets, but by tremors. Minor earthquakes have rippled through the region. Subtle, passing, almost unnoticed, but the mountain feels them. And so do the engineers tasked with monitoring its cracks. What they see is slow movement, pressure building, soil shifting beneath, layers of sacred memory. No one wants to call it prophetic. They call it erosion, weather, gravity, a natural result of rainwater and time. But prophecy never argues with science. It simply arrives when science runs out of explanations. And still, the dead weight, the cemetery that crowns the Mount of Olives, is not coincidence. Like the cemetery placed outside the eastern gate by the Ottomans, it stands as both obstacle and witness. In Jewish law, a priest cannot enter a graveyard without defilement. So the Sultan who feared the Messiah's return tried to trap him with death, to wall the gate, to block the path, to surround it with bones. But prophecy isn't bound by burial grounds. Resurrection begins where decay ends. And no tomb ever built can stop a voice that calls the dead to rise. The silence of stones is not the absence of power. It is the gathering of it. What waits beneath this mountain is not just a quake. It's a question. When the fault line opens, what else will open with it? Graves? Hearts? History itself? No one knows the hour. But everything on that mountain graves. Roots, rock seems to lean forward, as if listening. Not to the wind, but to a sound that has not yet come. A voice that once called Lazarus out of the tomb. A command strong enough to split not only stone, but time. The silence is not empty. It's sacred. The prophecy doesn't begin with thunder. It begins with a step. Zechariah didn't write of a whirlwind, or a blaze, or a trumpet blast, at least not first. He wrote of feet, human, physical, planted on soil. And his feet shall stand. It's a detail so simple, it's easy to miss, but it's everything. The mountain doesn't move on its own. It waits for contact, for presence, for the return of someone whose arrival causes more than rejoicing. It causes a rupture. We're used to thinking of the divine as distant, in the clouds, above, beyond. But this moment isn't heavenly abstraction, it's incarnation. It's geography. The prophecy says the mountain splits only when the Messiah places his feet upon it. Not before, not after. The shift is tied to his touch. That changes everything, because it means the earth itself is in tension. Not chaotic tension. Not random seismic drift, but sacred restraint. The land holds its fracture like a secret, not out of fear, but out of obedience. The fault line doesn't snap on its own schedule. It waits for the signal, the contact, the fulfillment. And when that foot touches down, the mountain will respond, not slowly, not politely, but with a violent opening. Half will move north, half will slide south, and between them a valley will form. A way of escape. Not just for people, but for time, for history, for everything caught in the waiting. The image is startling. God steps down, and the earth can no longer hold itself together. That's not metaphor. That's impact. We often imagine spiritual returns in emotional language, hope, peace, light. But this return is physical, measured in broken rock, in real dust. In geological data, it suggests that heaven is not far away. It's close. So close that a single step can awaken the plates beneath us. So the question isn't just if he will return. The question is what happens the moment his feet touch ground. Is the mountain waiting in fear or in reverence? Because when that step is taken, the earth will remember who it was made by, and it will respond the only way it can, with a fracture that was written before time. Asterisk. The scientists don't speak in prophecy. They speak in data, seismographs, soil samples, subsurface scans. And their warnings, while stripped of scripture, carry a strange echo. Because beneath Jerusalem, they see instability, not just possibility, but inevitability. They call it the Jerusalem quake theory, not folklore, not theology. A real, calculated expectation that this city, sacred and ancient, will one day shake. The Mount of Olives, they say, is particularly vulnerable. Some believe an earthquake is overdue. The last major one that tore through this region happened centuries ago. Since then, only tremors, rumors beneath the surface. But the pressure hasn't left. It's only gathered. The crust is stressed. The fault is restless. And the proximity to the Temple Mount, the epicenter of three great faiths, makes it more than geological. It becomes symbolic. Almost staged. They talk about plates, tension, time. But they avoid the verses. Avoid Zechariah. Avoid anything that connects shaking ground to sacred text. That's not their field. And yet, without knowing it, they echo prophecy. They say the mountain could split. They say the old stones are moving. They say the land is poised for something big. They don't say why. But prophecy already did. This convergence isn't about panic. It's about pattern. The earth and the word are not in conflict. They are aligned. One speaks in science, the other in vision. But both are pointing to the same place, the same mountain, the same inevitable break. And for those who watch not just the monitors, but the scriptures, this alignment isn't surprising. It's expected. Because no fault line lives forever beneath a sealed promise. Sooner or later, the ground responds. And when it does, it won't be random. It will be revelation. Asterisk. The prophecy doesn't end with the mountain splitting. It begins there. Because once the Mount of Olives breaks open, a valley forms a path. And Zechariah says the people will flee through it, not in fear, but in deliverance. The fracture becomes escape. The shaking becomes salvation. And after that, the Lord shall be king over all the earth. It's a sequence. First the step, then the split, then the rain, but it all begins with movement. Not in the sky, but in the stone. If the mountain moves, it means the waiting is over. It means the silence is done. It means that history long stalled in prophecy is now in motion. And that raises the question, are we ready? Because this isn't just about geography. It's about fulfillment. The earth groans, the graves lean forward, the sealed gates crack, and the fault lines begin to hum. All signs that the story is nearing its turning point. The world may call it erosion, or coincidence, or myth. But the mountain knows better. It was named in prophecy, positioned by design, and burdened with a promise it cannot shake off. Its fracture is not an accident. It's an appointment dot, so if the mountain does move, what follows? The return, the opening of eyes, the tearing of veils, the reign of a king who touches the dust and makes it tremble. Until then, we live in the pause between promise and fulfillment, between sealed stone and sudden rupture, between silence and the sound of a footstep that will end it. The Mount of Olives is not asleep. It is holding back, and when it finally lets go, everything will begin.